Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. I have finished the vast majority of Natlan's content. I have finished the Archon quest. I have finished my week of story quest. I've done all of the character story quests. I have done all of the world quests except for I think two in the very northwestern part of Natlan, which is the tribe that goes all flying. They're the ones that ride the flying Saurians. So I still have that to do, but I can't find the world quest for them at this point. But needless to say, I have done so much of Natlan's content that I have just enjoyed this region so much more than anything else in Genshin Impact that I would have to say unabashedly that this is my favorite region of all time. Like I can't even do a comparison without just simping for how much I like Natlan. And I think it has a lot to do with my expectations. I went into Natlan with very, very low expectations, to be honest. Like I think there was a community post. Yeah, there definitely is. I actually searched it up before this. This was my reaction to Natlan when it first came out. I'll be honest, the only Natlan characters I'm interested in are Mualani and Silali, which is one more character than Nefontaine. But still, I think what I'll be doing for Natlan on my main is just hyper investing into one character and ignore the rest. On my free to play, I'll be getting one or the other. Yansan definitely went through a redesign and I did not like her look. All the tall female characters look like they're Arlecchino variants. So that was my reaction to Natlan when it first came out. And then it's like my very, very first reaction was, well, I guess I like the Hydro girl. So very dismissive. Yes, I'll be saving for her after Farina since I skipped Novelette. Natlan looks about what I expected, by which I meant that it just looks like it looks okay, I guess. It doesn't look anything groundbreaking. It doesn't look anything I would like particularly much. But then I actually started playing Natlan, and you can see that my reaction just kind of did an almost 180. It wasn't as clear when I first started Natlan. I said, for those who missed the stream, I'm having a lot of fun with Natlan. The music is on point. The environment looks fresh. The graphical limitations seem to have been raised on animations NPCs a bit, by which I mean that there are just a bit more NPCs. The areas have a bit more NPCs. It's a bit more NPC dense. It looks like more of like the areas in Natlan, despite them all being tribal areas, feel like they're more lived in because there are more NPCs. There are still some places where I wish there were more NPCs. For example, during the Mawika story quest, there was a tournament during that time. And I think it was because the environment wasn't limited like it was during the story sections, but it didn't look like there were a lot of NPCs in the stand. But in the important parts during the Archon quest, for example, during the parade, after the end of the final fight, there were so many NPCs. It really gave me the feeling that I was like being celebrated. I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but basically the point is that I love how there are so many more NPCs in the areas in any given area in Natlan compared to the previous regions, and I definitely can see why they raised the graphical limitations, the graphical requirements for mobile devices a little bit compared to the previous regions. Is basically what I'm saying. So. Moving on, the new units are fun. This is something that I think has intrinsically to do with the fact that there are so many more movement abilities in the Natlan units. All of the Natlan units have unique movement abilities. And I think there is a bit of a mixed feeling on this. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people think it's pay to win, some people don't think it's pay to win. For me personally, I think it is pay to win. I think it is generally speaking, a bad thing to lock behind units like what should be general traversal abilities. But in my actual playtime in Natlan, none of this actually bothered me. Like there were even instances where I would rather use the free-to-play option by indwelling one of the Saurians compared to using the unit that I had actually pulled for. For example, I have almost all of the 5-star units except for Kanich, which is the one that swings around like Tarzan. And what I would do was I would actually use the free-to-play options instead of just switching to the character that had that option because I was just so lazy. And it didn't really bother me at all because the option to use the free-to-play option was so available at all times in which they were needed that I didn't feel like I was being gimped simply for not having the character that had that option to begin with, which is how it should be, right? If you were gimped in the gameplay in the places where you needed it, simply because you didn't have the pay to win option, then that would be very, very bad. That would be worse than what I had actually first imagined. And another reason why I actually liked using the free-to-play option is just because of immersion, right? I really like how the Saurians have been integrated into Natlan. I think they're way more interesting than the Fontamers or any of the other previous creatures in any of the previous regions. In Fontaine, one of the things I didn't like was that it felt like the civilization of Fontaine itself was completely removed from the Fontamers. Like there are like one or two interactions, but for the most part, the Fontamers are just like underwater and they're doing their own thing. And then it's like the Fontanian civilization was just their own thing above ground. I wish there was a lot more. I wish there was like a bit more to Fontaine when it came to interactions with the Fontamers, but I can see why they didn't do that because Saurians are intrinsically part of Natlan civilization, which is why I like so much how Natlan has been depicted. The moment you go into Natlan, it's like, holy shit, I get my own personal Pokemon, and Hit has done so much to make the exploration of Natlan more enjoyable. I really like the fact that Hit is just following us around all the time, and then he or she or whatever it is features so prominently in our adventures in Natlan. And there are all these other interactions between the Saurians. For example, Koya, Chaska's Pokemon. The Pokemon is literally Chaska's sister. Chaska was adopted by a Saurian family, and you can see like, holy shit, these Saurians, these evolved dragon people, not dragon people, but evolved dragons they used to be dragons, but then they turned into like chickens and I don't know, lizards, water lizards or some shit. It makes sense because in real life, dragons turned into chickens, so I can see what they were going for. Some people don't like the fact that there aren't as many dragons, like actual dragons in Natlan compared to when we first heard that, oh, it's going to be a land of dragons. And I knew exactly what they were going for immediately, so it didn't bother me at all. Another thing I really liked about exploration in Natlan, which isn't directly tied to Natlan, is the fact that they raised the world level itself, so that everything in Natlan took a lot more effort. Not a lot more effort, but it took a little bit more effort to kill compared to the previous regions. I know that Fontaine introduced local legends, but honestly, I had become so overpowered at that point that the local legends didn't bother me at all. In Natlan, there are like two different kinds of local legends. There's the local legends that are just out in the overworld, and then there are the local legends that have like special trial rules that you have to defeat within the YOB. So I really like the trials in the YOB. I like the fact that you actually have to obey the rules, and some people call them gimmicks, but I really like the fact that they're just challenging in general. And even the local legends out in the overworld, maybe it's because they raised the world level, but I even found them to be challenging. Like there was this one local legend, which was just 3 of the regular Fatui mobs that we have been fighting all the way back in Liyue. Holy shit, those things were tanky as hell. They hit like a truck. And I actually died to them like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times before I finally killed them with my OP Raiden team. So it's really fun. I really like the world exploration. And I'm mentioning this world exploration inside of like what is supposed to be, I don't know. At this point, I was going to make this into an Archon Quest review video, but I'm just talking about all the things I like about Natlan now, because the key thing about Natlan and why I like it so much is that everything feels so integrated. Everything feels like it fits. Like everything is a part of a single giant puzzle piece. Or a single giant puzzle, and all of the puzzle pieces fit nicely together. The Saurians interact with the humans interact with the Saurians. The world quest and the tribal quest all have this like central theme of dealing with war and the after effects of war. I think a lot of people were very confused going to Natlan because they're like, why isn't there actually any war? Until you get to the part where you actually fight the Abyss. I think a lot of people were thinking that it was going to be human versus human, and it turned out to be more human versus world. But what I like about this is that it handles the after effects of the war and all the suffering that the people went through in a very nuanced and more total way than I thought they would ever do in Genshin Impact. It felt more nuanced than I had given them credit for, or at least more than I expected. For example, the tribal quest with Shalona, where we dealt with a psycho mother who was grieving for her dead daughter and trying to turn her adopted daughter into like her previous daughter. That is some serious shit. Like holy shit, I never expected the tribal quest to go there. I was just like, what are they doing? What are they talking about for the first 2 parts of the quest? And then it suddenly it all almost immediately turned up to 11. By the time where they reveal the fact that the mother was trying to do all this evil shit, I should probably switch back to Moika so that you guys can look at something pretty, you know. It just completely turned up to 11 in a way that I didn't expect at all. It was like, holy shit, this thing could actually exist in real life. The fact that, I know this is a fantasy game, but all of the things that happen in Natlan have like an allegorical one-to-one parallel to reality. I can totally imagine somebody adopting a daughter after their own daughter had died and then trying to gaslight and manipulate them into becoming their previous daughter in every single way, from their behavior to what they do to what they should be interested in. This is some serious shit, and this is all tied back to the fact that the daughter died in like a random raid during the war. And then you have Chaska's story quest, where we deal with the after effects of having a society completely dedicated to war, so that the people who do not successfully complete their training and become like these flying riders of dragons, what are you supposed to do in a society where everything values strength? If you're not strong, then you're just fucked, right? And so they went through a coup, and the people who weren't strong are like, wait a second, we have a way to deal with this. We can just invent jetpacks. And one thing I didn't like about how that quest ended was the fact that they didn't try to make the jetpacks into something that was like not as exploitatory of the dragons, the Saurians, as they could be. Like, yes, the jetpacks in the story were were abusing the Saurians to create like the power source. But it felt like one thing that they missed was that they could have just done that without using the power source. Like, the idea itself of having jetpacks is not a bad thing, and that felt like a little bit of a cop-out to me. But the fact that they even dealt with the fact that there are repercussions to having a society totally dedicated to war and strength, and that there are losers who miss out on that, is so cool. It's like, and then all the story quests aside from that as well. For example, you have Kenichi's story quest, where we dealt with the after effects of war, and how Kangamato was kind of like an allegorical depiction of how people are just like so violent after the war. And I really like that. And it was like they turned Kangamato into somebody who was violent and randomly attacked people into somebody who would train with them. And I think that was also in some way an allegorical depiction of people who have like messed up lives after the war, and they can't get back to like society they can't get back into society and integrate themselves into like normal civilian society. I think that was what Kenichi's quest was going for. And Mualani, I think Mualani was probably the only one out of all the different quests that I felt like didn't hit me as hard. I think there was like some sort of message there about trying to seek treasure and, you know, the actual treasure with the island. But I definitely think Mualani's story quest was the weakest out of them. But why am I mentioning all this? This was supposed to be a review of the Archon quest. I'm mentioning all this because all of the story quests, all of the world quests that we did in Natlan actually made an appearance. They actually not altered completely, but they actually made appearances in the final Archon quest. And this is the key point I want to make about the Archon quest that is so good about it. It is the first time that Genshin's Archon quest was actually impacted by what you did in the overworld, outside of the main storyline. And this alone pushes Natlan's Archon quest from like, it's at least an 8 out of 10 for that alone. And I want to make sure you understand why. When I first went into Sumeru's desert, I felt like, wow, this was amazing. Desert, forest land, wow. The contrast between these two places is so large. And then we got another desert and then another desert, and I completely burnt out on the world exploration. I did not recover from world exploration burnout until Natlan. And the main reason why is because I felt motivated to do the world exploration, the world quest, and the tribal quest, because they matter to the main story. I barely did any of the exploration in Fontaine. Most of the regions are still around 50% exploration completion. I'm sorry, but the reason why is because it just felt so disconnected. It felt like there was the main story quest, and then there was everything else, and everything else was just an excuse to get primo gens, right? Why do I care about these characters who didn't do anything in the main story? Why do I care about, I don't know, Ayato? He didn't do anything in the main story. Why do I care about Ito? He didn't do anything in the main story. Why do I care about Ayaka's story quest? Because they forced me to do the story quest before I could move on with Inazuma's story quest. So it feels like it's really ham-fisted. It feels like all these characters are kind of disconnected from the main story. And that was not the case for Natlan. In Natlan, all of the tribal quests, all of the world quests, and their NPCs, they showed up in the main story's last battle. And they were like, holy shit, do you remember me? You helped me. Nipecha? Nichka? Wow, I helped you guys. and now you guys are helping me. The fact that the main slogan for Natlan, I think, is like "No one fights alone," is actually implemented in the gameplay, the actual gameplay. Natlan's gameplay is so much better than every single other regions. It's like you have all these Saurians too that made it into the final battle. It's like the best of series of Natlan all making it into the final sequence of the Archon quest. The Archon quest itself, from a story standpoint, the weakness I think is that you don't feel like really connected to any one character or their interpersonal relationships. There's nothing on the same level as I would say Novelette and Farina's relationship in Fontaine, and there's nothing like, I don't know, Kaveh or Alhaitham in Sumeru, or even like Sino and Tignari or and Calais. All these people, all these playable characters in these other regions have like all these deep interpersonal relationships. That is still kind of there in Natlan a little bit, but it's like it's definitely shallower, right? It's like Mualani and Kachina have a friendship. Shalonen and Mawika have some sort of relationship, but it's not clear on what level it is. And then Chaska, I don't know. All of these characters in Natlan feel like they have relationships to Natlan itself. It's like their relationship is to how they can help Natlan, and then they have their familial NPC relationships. Mawika has a deeper relationship with her NPC, sister, more so than any other character in the story, right? Her relationship isn't mainly towards the playable characters. It's towards Natlan, it's towards her family, it's towards Xbalanque. These are her main relationships that actually matter. And then Chaska's relationships are to her sister, to her mother, and to her adoptive family. These are all NPCs. Kanish, he doesn't do anything. I'm sorry, he just doesn't do anything. This is the one big letdown of Natlan. I don't think he has any ties to anybody except for Kahul, I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't play this game in English. That's another thing. One thing I didn't like about Natlan, it's not specifically about Natlan, but I started playing this game in English. Not this game, Natlan, although it's also true for this game. I started playing Genshin Impact in English, and then I switched to Chinese around the end of the Liyue arc, because I realized that, the English, I just couldn't stand Paimon. I'm sorry, that's basically what it is. And then in the start of Natlan, for whatever reason, for whatever novel reason I came up with, I don't know, it was just, I don't know why I did it, but I started playing Natlan in English, and it was great. Paimon was not nearly as annoying as I thought she would be. I think I've heard people say that Paimon was less annoying in Natlan. I don't know if that was true, but somewhere in the middle of Natlan's story arc, the English voices started disappearing, and then I had to switch back to Chinese. So that was like the one big thing I had a problem with Natlan. I forgot where I was. Something about NPCs and characters, right? So the playable characters themselves don't really have as many interpersonal relationships as the previous Archon quest, and I think that is like a big reason why people don't like the characters as much. But I will have to say that I care so much about the NPCs in a way that I have never done in any other previous Archon quest. I think this is the first time that Genshin Impact has actually made correct use of the NPCs in a way that I care about. Because when I help the NPCs, they also help me. I remember the names Nechka, Nepecha. I know why I helped them. Even the ones that I originally didn't think were that important. For example, Ateya in Mualani's tribe. I was like, wow, you died, but do I really care? And then she showed up in the main story in the final Archon quest. All of the people who died came back and helped us. That is like the one main theme of Natlan that is done so well. It's that you remember the past, and the past will also help you. It's so rewarding to finally see what you do in the story, not in the story, but in the game outside of the Archon quest, actually appear in the Archon quest. And that's why Natlan fits so well together. Everything feels like it has a place. All the different Saurians, all the NPCs, all the different playable characters. It's just done so well. And this has implications outside of Natlan as well. This is why I'm so hype about Natlan. It's because now that I know that there is a possibility that the World Quest and Tribal Quest, or whatever the future equivalent of Tribal Quest will be, they will actually, the fact that they might actually show up in the Archon Quest makes me so much more excited and so much more willing to do the stuff outside of Archon Quest rather than just binging the Archon Quest at the very end, like I did for Fontaine and I did to an extent with Sumeru. That it makes the whole of Genshin Impact elevated. It elevates Genshin Impact to a degree that I did not think it could possibly do. I thought it was all out of tricks, that there was just Archon Quest and that was the only thing that people were would be interested in. But now that the world quest and tribal quest or the future story quest also matter, it's so much more so much more involved. I don't have the words to describe how I feel right now, but I would not say that it's too out there. I would say that Genshin Impact was saved by Natlan for me. Because the Archon quests, as good as they are in Fontaine, as good as they are in Sumeru, I don't think themselves, the Archon quests, are enough to keep me playing Genshin. If it wasn't for Natlan and the way that Natlan did things, I honestly think I would have just quit this game for Wuthering Waves. Because Wuthering Waves, like, they have a good story too now in 2.0, I believe. I didn't play it, but from what I've heard, it's really good. And from my impression, from what I've heard about 2.0 story, it's just like a lot less yapping, and it's just get right into the action. And I'm not saying that that's the only thing I care about, but for a long time now, Genshin Impact has turned into something more similar to a visual novel. There's not a lot of gameplay involved. A lot of people seem to have the idea, including me, that Liyue was like this big yap fest, and it was. But I actually made a free-to-play account going back to play the first like 2 regions, and I plan to play the future regions as well on my free-to-play account, but that's where I'm stuck at right now. And to my surprise, like even Liyue had way more like combat instances, way more dungeon crawling. Not dungeon crawling, but there were more dungeons and more puzzle solving and more adventuring, even in the Liyue Archon quest, which I had like memory bottled as like this big giant yap fest compared to Sumeru and Fontaine. Starting from Sumeru and even in Inazuma in the very beginning, it was just like 1 or 2 hours of dealing with getting into Inazuma itself, and there was barely any actual gameplay. It was just talking to NPCs. Starting from Inazuma to around to Fontaine, this game did transform its Archon quest into something very much similar to a visual novel. I know that people who actually play visual novels are going to take offense at that because they're like, oh, actual visual novels are so much better. What I'm basically saying is that they took out the gameplay from the Archon quest. There is barely any gameplay. The last bosses in Sumeru, in Fontaine, they were a joke. They were complete jokes. There was barely any gameplay. They killed over in like 2 or 3 hits. It didn't even feel like you were fighting them. It was just like a puzzle. With the final boss in Natlan, the sequence leading up to the final boss with all of the NPCs appearing, with all of the Saurians taking place, it was like, again, like what I said, a best of series of what Natlan had to offer. It was like everything you did in Natlan condensed itself into just a short segment of gameplay. And it's not just the last boss, which didn't kill over in 3 hits, thank God. It's not just the sequence leading up to it. I feel like the Natlan Archon quest itself also was not necessarily less wordy, but it was a more digestible in a way that I didn't feel with Natlan, with Fontaine or even Sumeru. I feel like both Sumeru and Fontaine had these like little sequences that really bothered me. For example, the Fortress Merope, the prison arc in Fontaine, that was completely unnecessary. That was completely just bloat. The Samsara cycle in Sumeru as well, where you were just like walking slowly. They forced you to walk in the slowest fashion possible towards the fruit stand or some shit. That was not enjoyable. I feel like there was very, very minimal amounts of that in Natlan. Every single time there was like a big dialogue section in Natlan, I felt like it was immediately clear what they were going to get at. When Act 5 started and when we went to Mualani's like feast or something, I was a bit weirded out. I was like, we're going to fight this major battle and you're just going to have a feast. And then it became immediately clear that we were going to talk to all the playable NPCs, not playable NPCs, but playable characters, and that we were going to get their opinions. And then it pivoted to explaining things about how spirits worked and how Capitano was like some super special spirit anomaly or something. And then we went to help Salali out with settling the spirits, and it became immediately clear that this would be important later on in the story. In Fontaine and Sumeru, it just wasn't really, like, more so Fontaine than Sumeru, but it started in Sumeru. It felt like everything in the story was supposed to be like all these little tidbits that all gathered up together to solve a grand mystery, and the grand mystery was a core part of the story for Sumeru and Fontaine, and even to extent Inazuma, when we were trying to find out what was going on with the Raiden Shogun and why she was all crazy and trying to oppress the Inazuman people. I feel like that was a lot less the case in Natlan. Natlan is a lot more what you see is what you get. It's very much power friendship. It's very much like very straightforward, and that's reflected, I think, also in the Archon quest and what it asks you to do. It's a lot of, oh, the people here are being attacked by abyss creatures, go defend them from the abyss creatures. Oh, these people are suffering, you go help them. And then even the big dialogue portions, again, it feels like it's a lot more understandable what's going on. There's a lot less very opaque and dense dialogue, and I appreciate that. I know that a lot of people, especially on Twitter, on Reddit, the online vocal community, whatever you want to call them, the people who express their opinions in the most extreme ways, they're very disappointed with Natlan's story quest because it's a lot more straightforward, it's a lot more simple. The playable characters, at least on the surface level, aren't as deep as the ones in Fontaine or Sumeru. And I totally get that. I understand what they're saying. It's just that at this point in my time with Genshin Impact, I have all the characters as I want, right? I have Farina remains to this day my favorite Archon, right? I have her at C3. I've wailed the most for Farina. I've pulled her the most, even though for those of you who were there in my stream, my pulls were extremely horrible. I spent so much money and I just got C3. It was very disappointing. But it's because that I have all these favorite characters from the previous regions that I don't really feel the need to connect to like the modern Genshin characters as much anymore. I think this is one thing that sets me apart from a lot of other Genshin players, which is that I don't come from a gacha game background. I don't feel the need to have this like parasocial relationship, if you want to really get cynical about it. I don't feel the need to have like this parasocial relationship with these characters. I don't need them to reveal their inner, deepest, darkest secrets to me. I don't need them to have like bisexual or like straight relationships with other characters that I can canonize in my head and write fanfiction about. I really do just care the most about the game itself, as like the game of Genshin Impact and its gameplay and the world building and the world of Genshin Impact, the world of Teyvat. So I'm really happy that Natlan's story quest, its Archon quest, is not only more direct and straightforward, but also deals with the things that we have been learning about in the lore for Genshin since the very beginning. Like, we've known about the Shades since probably around, at the very least, the end of the Inazumo Archon quest, so that's like more than 3 years ago. And it's so cool to just see all the things that have been building up reach fruition. And now it's like leading up into bigger things with the fake sky being destroyed a little bit. And now we're seeing the fragments of the moon, or the moon sisters, whatever you want to call them. And I don't know where to go from here. I just enjoy this game so much now. I think it's too not too over top to say that Genshin Impact really was saved for me with Natlan. And if it wasn't for this region, if it wasn't for the Saurians, if it wasn't for the different exploration options, if it wasn't for the more straightforward story quest, if it wasn't for the integration of the world quest and the tribal quest into the main story, if it wasn't for the more, frankly, more shonen, which is just like a euphemism for you guys who don't, aren't interested in manga and anime and that sort of thing. It's basically just a euphemism for like young adult male storytelling. You've got a lot of combat, you've got a lot more straightforward action, you've got a lot more power friendship power-ups. Some people think it's really corny. I don't think it is at all. I think the fact that we were celebrated at the very end wasn't so much that it was glazing us, but that it was celebrating us helping Natlan, and Natlan also helping us at the very end. This feels deserved. It feels deserved, that the fact that I spent all this time doing all the tribal quests and the world quests, and that it was reflected in the final celebration. And I think there was also a bit of juxtaposition between the celebration of us as the traveler and the fact that Capitano was really the one that saved Natlan in the long term by offering himself up to the Lord of Night. One thing I will say is that Capitano probably should have been developed a little bit better. I wish there was more explanation for why Capitano was chosen, that Renova was willing to choose, or why Renova was willing to accept Capitano as the one to die instead of Moika, even though Moika was being focused on for so long in the Archon quest as the one fated to die. And I think there's probably some sort of lore explanation for it. From what I've read online on Reddit, it's because of mistranslation. Apparently, Renova just wanted somebody to die of equal value to an Archon, but it didn't necessarily have to be Moika. So that is the explanation that I've been taking right now. And there's probably some legalese involved as to why Renova had to accept Capitano, but that is just outside of my domain and my knowledge of the world quest. Basically, what I'm saying is that Natlan good. In my heart, it's a 10 out of 10. But objectively, it is nowhere near like some of the most extreme negative opinions about Natlan, solely because of the integration of world quest and tribal quest into the main story. I think that alone pushes it up to, at the very least, like a 7 or 8 out of 10. And for me personally, because the themes of Natlan and the suffering from war being cured, I think the themes resonated with me so much that I would just push it up to like at least a 9 out of 10. There are some things, small things that I don't like. For example, I think the part where we went into the Night Kingdom to save Kachina and the way it was resolved was a bit too corny, a bit too cheesy, a bit too shoehorned for me. I didn't like that part. I didn't like the way that Capitano should have gotten a bit more screen time, in my opinion. And it should have been better explained why, again, why he was chosen, or why Renova had to choose him as the person to die, even though he couldn't die. So those are my main complaints about the Archon quest. Oh yeah, I also didn't like how the Collective Plenty didn't really take a role in the final battle. It's like we got all the different Saurians except for the Collective Plenty, and I think their dinosaur is called the Tatankasaurus. I don't really know, but they should have been there. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Natlan's Archon quest. This is the longest video I've done in a very long time, isn't it? I just kept on ranting. I have so much to say about this story quest. In the future, I think I'll do a video on why the opinions on Natlan's story quest is so divisive. And basically it has to do with people's conception and idea of what Genshin Impact should be. And I think the key here is that Genshin Impact is such an old game now. It is getting on in its age. It's like 5 years old. It's heading into its 5th year of its lifespan. Did you know that Honkai Impact 3rd is 8 years old now? We are closer in Genshin Impact's lifespan to where Honkai Impact 3rd is now than when Honkai Impact 3rd first released. Honkai Impact 3rd's current state is closer to modern Genshin than it is to, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but Genshin Impact 3rd is old. And the point is, because it is old, because there are so many things, there's a churn of players. People have come into Genshin and gone out of Genshin, and new players have come into Genshin. And we all have different ideas of what Genshin Impact should be or should not be. There's a lot of talk about whether or not motorcycles belong in Genshin Impact, whether or not they fit, or whether or not the lore supports it. But we all have these different ideals because we all came in at different times with Genshin Impact. We all have different ideas of what we enjoy the most in Genshin, whether that's lore or shipping or the character lore, or whether or not, certain things happen in Genshin Impact. Like, it's all completely different. And that is something I realized with Natlan. And it's the fact that, for me, at least, I still view this as a game first and foremost. And what that means is that I value interactivity. I value that the things that I do in the game are reflected in the gameplay. And they just did a little bit more of that. I wouldn't even say a little bit more. When I went into the final act of the Archon quest, I already knew that, I knew prior to that the NPCs would show up in some fashion, and that what I did in the World Quest and Tribal Quest would be reflected in the final Archon quest. I already read spoilers about that, but I didn't know exactly how that would happen. I had a very shallow understanding. I didn't read all of the spoilers. I just basically all I knew was that the NPCs would show up. And I thought they would just say, "Hi, I'm here. Good luck to you." And they kind of just did that, but it was so much more involved in it. Like Nepecha and Nichka, they all said things that actually made sense, and like they further developed their own main stories, is what I'm saying. It's not as shallow as just them just saying, "Oh, hi, goodbye, hi and goodbye." They contributed in some ways. It's like, "Oh, my dead mother or my alive mother." I don't know whether or not the cycle mother is still alive or not, but it's like Nichka, I believe, said that her mother gave her power to Nichka so that Nichka could help us. So it's a further development of the stories that we did in the main, outside of the main story. And then I believe there was also like Atea, all these NPCs, Atea and Guthrid, they're NPCs from the main story, and Vichama and Malko. All these are characters from NPCs from the main story. But there was also Bona and Ochkon, otherwise known as Coco Eek. They also appeared, and it's just so good. I don't have the words. I'm sorry. I don't have the words to describe how excited I was when I saw those characters. It's like, wow, they actually fight with me. And those are my current thoughts about Natlan. I have gone long enough. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Thank you for looking at Mawika's boobs all this time. And I'll see you guys later. This is Bench Gamer signing out. And bye-bye. 10 out of 10, by the way, Natlan's Archon Quest. Superb.